I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, and this Monday I'm going to talk a little bit about a match that I shot this Saturday. This was the season finale for our local club matches. And it was held at a private range, and normally our local club, we really only shoot out to 500 yards. We compensate for the short distance with different obstacles and tight time limits and that, but this time we were shooting at a private range that one of the club members owns, and we were able to get out to 1120 for the farthest shot on it. So it was a really nice change of pace. Really had to pay a little bit more attention to your wind calls. The drawback on that is shooting out to that distance with wind, it starts to really handicap 308 shooters and really starts to play to the strengths of the longer range, flatter shooting, higher BC guns like 6.5 Creedmoor, 6.5 by 47, some of the other rifles out there. I did shoot the Mega Arms MATEN 6.5 Creedmoor project there, and we did get the US Optics LR17 back in time to get it on the rifle, get zeroed, and take it out there. And we'll talk about a couple of the problems that I had with the LR17 here shortly, and one problem that cropped up with the MATEN. Overall, our stuff worked pretty well. I finished about middle of the pack, which, since our club has quite a few top-ranked PRS shooters in it, is really not a bad finish. But it's also because I sat back and looked at some of the ways I've been preparing for these. First of all, throughout this season, I've been jumping around on different rifles. I tend to not stick to one rifle for more than a couple of matches before I change up and do something different. For me, for what I do, where I'm testing gear and trying to get evaluations out to let you guys know how stuff works, that's really good because it immediately throws the gear into the hot seat, and it really puts it in the line of fire. I have to use it with match stress, with not really knowing what kind of scenarios I'm going to have to utilize the gear in. So it's a good thing for me to be able to test stuff. It is not a good thing for me to be able to perform to the absolute limit of my abilities. It really keeps me from developing habits that are honed in for one piece of gear over and over again. So that's really going to make me take a look at sticking with one platform for my match shooting for next year. It also will probably help my rankings if I shoot PRS matches next year for a PRS score instead of just shooting them for the match itself. Of course, there will be some limitations there. I will be shooting the Oregon Sniper Challenge again this year. They'll be running it, again next year. They'll be running it for 2016. Previously, the Oregon Sniper Challenge was a every 2 years match. We shot it in 2015. We are probably going to shoot it here. Not probably, there's a 99% probability, work dependent, that I'm going to shoot it again in 2016, and that is a 308 limited match. So I couldn't take the 6.5 Creedmoor project even if I wanted to. I have to shoot a 308 rifle. So I'll settle on one of the 308 limited guns that I have here. That way I can actually get a good train up going. The proof-barreled AT worked very, very well when I shot at the Oregon Sniper Challenge this year. But I don't know that that rifle is going to be available to me to shoot that. The AT is on loan from us from Accuracy International, and we are getting towards the end of our evaluation period with it. We're getting ready to wrap up the actual review of the AT with its factory barrel on it, and we're getting ready to wrap up the review of the proof barrel separately as well. So we're going to get that out to you guys, but then when that's done, that rifle will go back. The Collis K624 that we had in, that's already gone back. You guys have access to the review on that. So as you see, we get stuff that rolls through the shop pretty regularly, and I need to get out and shoot it, but shooting something different on every match limits my amount of train-up time on that gear, and it limits, really, I think, my effectiveness with that gear in the match. Still a great way to evaluate gear. But That's one of the holes that I've found in my training. One of the other problems that I've had is I have not been shooting really long range stuff here lately. I've been concentrating again on the intermediate range, which most of the matches that we'll go to shoot, PRS level matches, and that the vast majority of your shots are between 300 and 700 yards. There will be a scattering of them beyond 700. Scatter of them will be really close range, a handful of them, maybe even under 100 yards. But the vast majority of them will be in that 300 to 700 yard range, and that's really where I've been concentrating on my shooting. And I think that's hurt me a little bit with the long range stuff. So I have to hunt down a place where I can really reach out in that 1,000 to 1,300 yard range and start getting more trigger time there. So this next year we may be spending some more time heading down to Rock Castle, heading down to Thunder Valley, and getting some long range shots down in their neck of the woods. If you guys have never been to Rock Castle before, there is a shooting area at Rock Castle Shooting Center that is called Thunder Valley, and it is just like it says, it's a great big valley. The wind does some really weird things there because it dips down over the trees in one section of the valley, comes through, and then comes up on the other side. Or sometimes it starts at one end of the valley and dips in and runs along the tree line. So it just depends. It can be pretty sketchy depending on which day you shoot. And if you go from one corner of the valley to the other corner of the valley, you can get about 1,100 yards out of it. And they usually have a steel plate set up in the tree line that's about 1,600 yards. So if you want to take a really long shot, then that's usually up there if the vegetation allows you to actually see it, and you can get a shot up there. So it's a really great place to train, and I'm going to try to get down there a couple of more times a year. Last year I didn't manage to get down to Rock Castle, I think, at all, and it's a really great place to be. So we're going to try to get down there a little bit more often and take you guys with us in camera form and let you see what's going on down there. So that's a second place that I've seen some of my issues have arisen. Now, the last couple of points are on the weapon system itself. I have about 350 rounds through this rifle now, and I don't really have a solid grasp on its characteristics because I have not gone out with it and, for instance, cold bore tracking. We haven't done cold bore tracking on this rifle yet because it's had a variety of different scopes on it, which makes it difficult to do cold bore. Cold bore tracking, you have to run the same zero and you have to shoot it on subsequent days and log the first shot of the day. So if you switch scopes or switch mounting systems, or you pull the scope and replace the scope to do something, the next day you can't do cold bore tracking because you're going to have to re-zero the scope. You could kind of do it because you can fire a shot and then fire the next shot and see if they impact on top of each other, but it's really not a good idea if you've done anything with the mounting system because that first shot may cause the mounting system to seat. If you have any gap left between the ring lugs and the lugs in the rail, when you fire that first shot, it'll close that gap, and then the next shot is going to impact with a different deviation than your true cold bore warm bore would. So that's one of the reasons we have not been doing cold bore tracking on this rifle, which is something I need to do if I want to continue to use it in rifle competitions. We did have a cold bore shot on this match, and I zeroed it out because I was about 1/10 of a mil low. So had a little bit of an issue there. 1/10 of a mil isn't a big deal. I thought that was pretty good based on the fact that I had to take this out a couple of days before, get the LR17 remounted, get it dialed in, and get my zero set on it. Those of you that have used a US Optics with the EREC on it before know it is not the easiest system to zero. It's not the hardest, but you don't really just dial in your zero like you would on a standard scope. The EREC, you have to use an Allen wrench down through a center cover, and you turn the actual erector screw without any clicks on it. So it can be a little bit of a pain to get it dialed in. Still tenth of a mil was fairly close, and I was able to fix that with no issue at all. The second problem that I ran into with the system overall is I believe my muzzle velocity has changed. We took it out as soon as we got the rifle together, and we threw the magnetospeed chronograph on it, and we got some velocity readings on it, and that's pretty much the velocity that I've been using all along through here. Once we worked up some hand loads, again, we got the velocity on those and ran with those. Now, I say worked up. Basically, I threw together what equates to a factory Hornady 140 grain load, but using the 140 grain BTHP instead of the 140 AMAX that comes in their factory 6.5 Creedmoor load. Now, all I did was, again, throw the magnetospeed on, get velocity on it, and the magnetospeed is extremely accurate. And we've had rifles before where I can throw the chronograph on, get numbers, plug those into the Kestrel, and then just rock on with the Kestrel and get long-range hits with no problem. I didn't need to go verify real-world data. I just rolled with the muzzle velocity and the BC of the bullet and, of course, the environmental conditions, and it gave me good data back. We have seen a divergence with this rifle in the data that we're getting. So now I have to back into it, and I need to go figure out why. And that may necessitate me taking the rifle out and going old school and shooting each yard line and checking what my deviation is, and then using a ballistic computer and backing into my other numbers. I know the BC for the bullet is correct because in the 260 we use that same bullet and that same BC, and we don't have any problems with it at all. But for some reason with this rifle, it's a little off, and I have a feeling what's off is going to be the muzzle velocity. The muzzle velocity in barrels can change for a variety of reasons. This is a Criterion barrel. It's still what we consider a match barrel, but it's not exactly the same level as a Bartling barrel or a Hawk Hill barrel or Rock or Brooks or a number of those out there. They are lower priced barrels, and there may be some concessions you make with those lower priced barrels. This is the first Criterion barrel that we've used, and it has been very accurate for the price. I mean, it's a $400 barrel, and it's shot very, very well. But I don't know what has happened in the throat because we don't have a bore scope here, so I can't stick it in there and see what the condition of the throat is versus when we first put it on. We may have smoothed the barrel out a little bit. We may have lost a little bit of lead in that 300, 350 rounds that I fired through it. There may be a couple of different things going on. So it's time to get the chronograph back on there to check the speed, and then again to go out and fire at each yard line and note my deviation, and then that will give us some real world numbers that we can go back in and figure out what's going on with this. It's not a big deal. It's stuff that, again, I've already got all this stuff figured out on rifles that I consider a primary match rifle. The 260, I know exactly where that thing shoots. I know exactly what it's doing until that barrel goes south. So on this rifle, I don't have the experience shooting it quite yet. It's getting there, but I don't have the experience with it to really be able to look at it and instantly know what's going on with the rifle. We have to kind of play with it. We have to spend some more time in training and some more time gathering data on the rifle before I would really feel comfortable taking it to a high-level match where I've spent thousands of dollars to get there. Then we run into the one little equipment issue that we had. Now, let me talk about the construction of the Mega Arms MATEN receivers, or their billet AR receivers. On a standard forged AR receiver, or even the Mega forged receivers, they use a roll pin to hold the bolt catch in. So there's a roll pin in there, and when the magazine is empty and it pushes up on the bolt catch, it'll stop your bolt from moving forward, keep the bolt locked back, and you know you're empty. Well, I started to notice as I was shooting that when the mag would run dry, I wouldn't get the lock back. And those of you that are really familiar with shooting ARs and shoot them a lot, you can pretty much instantly tell when you fired that last cartridge in the magazine. There is a different feel in the recoil impulse when the bolt locks back. Also, the trigger reset feels different. So I would go through and shoot my stage, and I'm not really counting rounds as I'm shooting because I knew I only loaded 10 rounds in the magazine if it was a 10-round stage, so I knew I fired until the magazine went dry, and that was the last shot for the stage. Well, I would get a click on the last shot telling me that I was pulling the trigger the 11th time instead of the 10th time, so the bolt didn't lock back. And I was still able to lock it back by holding the bolt release and pulling the charging handle to the rear. So I didn't really think anything of it. And then I would get situations where I would just bump the rifle and the bolt would fall, because while it's unloaded, while it's sitting back on the line, the bolt's locked back on the rifle to indicate that it's clear. And it would just intermittently drop on its own. So after a while, I started to wonder, hey, what's going on here? And unfortunately, at that point in time, the pin had already separated itself from the rifle. Now, as I mentioned, on the forged receivers, there's a roll pin that's driven in, and I've never had a roll pin fall out of a forged receiver since they are spring steel. And when you put them in, they're naturally expanding. They're holding themselves in there with friction and with spring force. So they stay put pretty well. In fact, they can be a real pain in the butt to get back out if you break a bolt catch and you need to replace that. On the Mega Arms MATEN and on the forged AR lowers, they use a pin with threads on it. So it's basically a specialized screw that they make that you screw in with an Allen key, and then that holds the catch in. The benefit of this is it makes it a whole lot easier to service that part should you need to replace that bolt catch. The drawback is, first of all, it's a proprietary pin, so I don't carry spares in the shop here. And then secondly, it's just being held in by the threads. I don't believe this was Loctited since it came with the bolt catch already installed from Mega. It wasn't something that we took it apart and looked at it. Had I installed it, I would have Loctited it. So now I have to add that to my preventative maintenance schedule and know that on any of these rifles, I need to check that pin when I go through and clean the rifle and make sure that it's not backing out. What I will probably end up doing when I contact Mega and get a replacement or two, I'll put it in and I will Loctite it in, and that way we don't have to worry about it falling out before. Now, the upside to that was it was annoying, but it didn't take the rifle out of the game. Just a lot of the stages, almost all the stages, would start with the magazine in and the bolt back. So that put me at a slight disadvantage because on the first couple of stages, I'll start magazine in, bolt back, and I can have my trigger finger resting on the right side bolt release on the MATEN. So as soon as they say go, and as soon as I drop the rifle into position, I hit the bolt release, flip the selector, and I'm on the trigger and I'm ready to go. I don't have to fumble with locking close the bolt or any of that nonsense. After the bolt catch failed, obviously the right side bolt release no longer works, and what I would have to start is with the magazine in and the bolt forward on an empty chamber, and on the go signal I would have to grab the charging handle and rip it to the rear. Now we are using a BCM extended charging handle on here until we can get a Mega slide lock, and it's got a really long charging handle. I can't remember which of the mods it is, but it's their longest 308 charging handle, and it's really easy to get it and rip it, but the problem is now I'm moving the rifle back, I'm not going forward into my firing position, and it's really a pain in the butt because that is not how I trained to do it, so I had to do something different at the start of every stage. It's a whole lot easier to drop the rifle in, be getting settled on it, and release that bolt selector and get on the trigger than it is to have to get it into position, move my face, rip the charging handle, get my face back on the rifle, then selector and trigger and be ready to fire. So slight drawback there. Again, it's just a bump. It's something to get past. You learn how to overcome those things. Back to the optic, because we were having some issues with the ballistic data not lining up with where the impacts were actually occurring. This actually made me kind of more attuned to what's going on, because I pretty much knew that my first shot on the longer range targets out to 600-700 and beyond was going to be a miss. I had to really be locked in and trying to watch for that impact. This rifle makes watching your own impacts very, very easy, because it's a very soft recoiling for a large frame AR, and the APA brake that we have on it really takes out a whole lot of that recoil. So it makes it easy to stay locked in even in some funky barricades and fire your shot and watch the impact. But I had to know that I was going to have to watch that impact and adjust on it. And then we threw some funky winds into it too. I had at least one where the wind would fishtail back and forth, and I dropped rounds on either side of the target because it just was being that strange. I would just do slightly incrementally more or less holds, and then the bullet would drop on the complete other side of the target. So really, really interesting wind conditions out there, but it compounded some of the difficulties that I was already having with getting my elevation on. And then once I get the elevation on, I then had to play the wind game. So there were a couple of stages where I only got a handful of hits, where normally I think I would have gotten considerably more hits. We had a test your limit stage, and the test your limit stage, I ran through the first 2 targets 3 different times, because I'd get a solid hit, and then I would miss the next target and come back, and again, solid hit, miss, solid hit, miss. And I think I ran through it 3 times before I said, I'm done, and ended with 1 round left in the magazine. So overall, it was a really, really interesting deal. Now, we'll talk about the US Optics LR17 here real quick. First of all, I won this scope at the Oregon Sniper Challenge this year, and I really want to thank US Optics for supporting the shooting sports and putting these prizes out here. This is almost a $3,000 rifle scope. So it's a really nice prize to have sitting on the table. I finished 4th in the Oregon Sniper Challenge, so I was able to nab it and was fairly happy with it. It has the H59 reticle in it, which is a reticle I'm used to using, so I don't have to get reacquainted with anything. And the features overall in the scope, its first focal plane, it is a 3.2 to 17 power on the top end. It's got the EREC turret, which the EREC works like a pseudo zero stop. It's not really a zero stop, but in function, that's the way it works. I can't go 1 turn under on my elevation. So if I ever get lost in the elevation, and it's difficult to get lost with the EREC, I can just turn it down till it stops and then come back up to 0, and I know I'm actually on 0. I'm on my first rev. It has a capped windage turret, which is very nice because I don't use windage that often. So I like the fact that I can keep the turret zeroed out, I can cover it, I can keep it locked down and safe, and I don't even have to worry about it. But should I decide that I'm doing a stage with movers or something else where I need to dial a lead in, or I want to dial windage, then I can take the cap off real quick, get at it, and I'm good to go. It also has an illuminator reticle, and this is USO's digital illumination, so I don't have to worry about forgetting and leaving it on. It can turn off. I can set the brightness level and then shut it off and bring it back on at the same brightness level. That again is a really, really nice feature, and there's no caps or covers. Both the way this is designed, the buttons are recessed in there, so it's really difficult to get the buttons pressed in the bag. It is a TPAL, so it does have the parallax adjustment on the left side of the turret here, and that's about it. we got it initially, put it on. I shot the Guardian long range match with it. It performed excellently at the Guardian match. I shot it at a local match after that, and then started to have some problems with it. I had debris appear on the reticle. Now, I've seen this happen before. Sometimes if you just get paint flecks or dust flecks or something in there, then if you take the scope off the rifle and you hit it on something hard, foam books are usually the preferred item because they won't dent the scope, but it'll allow you to apply enough force that you can knock that debris off the reticle or off the lens, and it will catch in some of the grease that is inside the tube, and you don't have to worry about it being in your field of view anymore. Well, this was a slightly different problem that wasn't going to be solved that easily. What I actually ended up having is splatters of grease on the reticle itself. And since it's grease, it's stuck on that reticle, it's not coming off. If you've ever gotten grease on glass before, there's no way to resolve that other than taking a solvent and cleaning the grease off of that. Obviously, there's no way to access that. It's not a user serviceable thing. So I contacted US Optics, and actually after we posted here on Facebook and I sent them an email, they called me the next morning, and we went ahead and got a return shipping label and got this off to them. And in a couple of days, they notified me that they had received the scope, rebuilt it, and they were getting ready to send it back and confirm my return address, which is a nice touch. I wanted to make sure that the scope wasn't going to someone else who I'm sure would be really happy to see a unexpected $3,000 rifle scope show up. So they contacted me, they sent it back, and I asked them what exactly they did to it. Well, the issue was what I expected it was grease splatter on the reticle. They said it's usually caused by a recoil. It was interesting to me because I didn't notice it at the end of the Guardian match, and I definitely would have had it been there. And I noticed it when I pulled it out of the case to shoot the first stage of the local match. So it really wasn't shot in between. So for some reason, being in transit, laying in the back of the car, driving halfway across the country, is what caused the grease to seep out. They pretty much went in. The grease, first of all, I'll tell you, came from the parallax assembly is what they were telling me. I guess a seal failed in there and the grease was able to leak out into the scope. So they went back in, they rebuilt the parallax assembly, they pretty much rebuilt the entire innards of the scope. I think all I probably got back was the outside hard parts and the lenses. They said they pretty much rebuilt the entire inside. And they cleaned the scope to such a high degree that even the marks that I put on the main tube to help me try to line my rings back up, they cleaned those completely off. When I opened the box, it looked like a brand new scope. It's still the same serial number, so it wasn't a brand new scope, but it looked like a brand new scope when I took it out. So we got it mounted back up and zeroed out, and it worked fine as far as I can tell. We don't have any issues with any debris inside the reticle again. Now this is only the first match that I've shot with the scope back on. I need to get some more time on it before I can tell you if it's an issue that's going to come back. It is not an unknown issue with US Optics scopes. I've seen it reported online several different times. This was the first time it's happened to me. I also have an SN3 that has seen tons and tons of rounds on it, and I've never had an issue with it, but it is an ergo parallax adjustment, so it has an adjustable objective. It does not have the T-PAL, the side parallax adjustment. So a little bit of a different mechanism, but the SN3 has performed flawlessly for us, so I'm hoping that now we've got this problem resolved, that the LR17 will be just as flawless, because I would like to keep it on this rifle and continue to shoot matches with this package set up as it is. Once we get some more rounds through it and see that the issue is not going to come back, we'll report back with a full review of this optic. Now the one other thing that we do need to check now, because again I was saying my impacts and my data were not lining up at this match. We're going to have to take it out and we're going to do a vertical tracking drill on it, and we're going to make sure that when I dial 10 mils on the elevation, I'm actually getting 10 mils in real life. That is really a critical thing, and that could account for a deviation. Now, if you have a scope that has a slight deviation, most ballistic calculators will allow you to account for that. So you can go in and you can input a difference in the actual click and what you need to get dialed in, and the computer will give you a solution that is designed specifically for that turret with the variance already accounted for. That is not an excuse for rifle scope manufacturers to make a scope that does not line up perfectly, because then you run into issues with your reticle versus your turrets. I don't want to look through my reticle and say I need 5 mils to adjust for a problem and then dial 5 mils on, and I'm really only dialing 4 3/4. So the turrets need to be accurate, but part of the routine that you have to go through when you get a new scope is to run a tracking drill, and because of the compressed timelines we're working with, we have not run a tracking drill on the scope yet. Amazingly enough, it worked out for me at Guardian, but it's not working out here, and I don't think it's going to be the scope. I don't think the scope's going to be an issue. I think it's somewhere else, but this is ruling out variables, and the scope is definitely one that we need to rule out. Last thing I'm going to talk about here real quick is one of the key pieces that we've been using with the MATEN when we shoot it in matches, or even now I've been using it during practice, and that's this brass catcher. This is a Caldwell brass catcher. Unfortunately, it's made in China. It's not a super duper high quality piece, but it works fairly well for what we needed to use it for. It has a little mount here that goes onto the Picatinny rail, and then it has this bracket that is adjustable. You can loosen up 2 Allen screws in here and slide the bracket to wherever you need to be able to get the brass catcher over your ejection port. It works fairly well on the MATEN, works on AR-15s, but there are a couple of things that you need to be aware of with it. The first is that you notice here we're just using 2 extra high rings to mount our scope. So we've got plenty of rail underneath the scope, plenty of rail in front or behind. So we can put the mount pretty much anywhere we need it. That, I think, is what the system is really intended to use for. Now, if we dropped a one-piece mount on here, like say we put a spur mount on, then that blocks out all this spot in between, and we would only be able to go either up front here or behind. And with the MATEN, it's really not going to work. If I try to go up front here, then it's going to move it too far forward and it's going to hit the shell deflector, and it's not going to seal up good against the side of the receiver, and it's probably not even going to click in tight enough that it's not going to fall off. So if you run a one-piece mount, this probably isn't going to work on you on a MATEN. On an AR-15, depending on your mount and how far forward or back you have your scope mounted, you may be able to get the thing to work. So in that aspect, I can't ding Caldwell on that, because I don't believe it was really intended to be used with one-piece mounts, but it's something you guys need to be aware of. The other big drawback to it, and this is a major ding for them, is the material that they used for the bag. It's great that it is a mesh material that you can see through. It allows air to circulate through so your brass can cool. It allows the gases to escape out of the ejection port, and it does a fairly good job of holding the brass. The big problem is it appears to be a polyester mesh, and polyester has a fairly low melting point. Brass coming out of a 6.5 Creedmoor or even a 308 AR is fairly hot. In fact, it's hot enough that it will peel skin off your arms, legs, whatever. It also appears to be higher than the melting point of polyester mesh, as you can see by holes here. The ejection pattern of the 6.5 Creedmoor puts the mouth of the case right in this corner. It kicks them in that corner time and time and time again. And we actually have 3 holes here opened up now to the point where it will kick a case out of the hole if things line up just right. If I fired 10, 15 rounds, I can pretty much be assured that 1 or 2 are going to slip out through those holes. Now the brass catcher still works for my purposes because even though 1 or 2 will make it out the holes, they will drop right next to you instead of being flung 3 or 4 yards away. And that way when you're done with the stage, you have the bulk of your brass in the catcher. You can just pick up those 1 or 2 from underneath the firing point and then walk away with them and you're good to go. Caldwell definitely needs to improve this on the next version though and do something other than this mesh. Even if they just did the nylon that they have the rest of the frame attachment points made out of, I think that would be a great option. Now for those do-it-yourselfers at home that have access to mom or wife's sewing machine, or if you're like me and you have 2 industrial sewing machines of your own, then it may be a simple option to take the bag off of the brass catcher, rip the seams, create your own pattern, and then sew your own bag that will go back over top of this metal frame in here. That's my biggest gripe with it. It has this neat zipper in the bottom, so I don't even have to take it off of the rifle. I can just zip it and dump it. I do like the fact that with the mesh, I can see clearly enough through the mesh that I can verify that the rifle is clear without removing the bag. So in most instances, unless the RO on the stage really wants to see an unobstructed view, most of the time I can get away with just leaving the bag on the side of the rifle for almost the entire match. Now I wouldn't put it in a drag bag with this attached because while it's a fairly stiff steel frame holding the bag in its shape, it is really not going to take a whole lot of hitting. It's a little thicker than say coat hanger wire and it definitely is more rigid than that. That portion of it is really fairly high quality, but if you drop a rifle on the side, it's probably going to fold the cage up and you're going to have some issues. But overall, I think it's fairly worth the value. I can go through here and take some thread or some 550 cord guts and I can lace this back up and close those holes up and it will still be serviceable for another 300 or 400 rounds. It's taken probably about 300 rounds to get to the point it is now. Although the first couple of rounds you fire through it, you'll notice that it's sticking to the mesh. When they stick to the mesh down the bottom, it's not a big deal just to pull those couple of cases out. But up here at the top, it definitely causes an issue when it starts melting through. So that's the quick down and dirty on the Caldwell brass catcher. I can definitely recommend it. We reviewed a $3 brass catcher before. That one is a very high quality brass catcher that does not have the problems that the Caldwell does, but it's considerably more expensive. And the Caldwell, you can get extra mounting points to put mounting points on each one of your rifles and only have one bag that you have to switch between. The $3 brass catcher, you can do that, but it is really difficult to order stuff like that from them. The $3 you can get from Brownells, Midway, etc. But the extra mounts you cannot. You have to order them direct from $3. So brass catcher I think is mandatory when you're running these guns. Otherwise you're just donating your brass to the brass gods. And with 6.5 Creedmoor Hornady being a little bit difficult to get from time to time, I would definitely recommend a brass catcher. I think that's about it for my babbling for this Mail Call Mondays. Hope you guys have enjoyed this kind of disjointed show, but I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare for it. I'm really crunching on schedules, but I didn't want to leave you guys with another Monday without a show. So here it is. Hope you guys like it. If so, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. If you got any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. And until next time, get out and shoot.